Hello there, it's Josh. As always, hope you had a good day. I thought I would try and record a brief enough video, and I know I say that every time, but I haven't actually done one for a while where I get the overstake it out and beat myself to death. But I thought it would be useful actually for my own purposes as much as anything else to look back and reflect on a couple of recent winners that I was nowhere near, mainly primarily with my stats or best of the stats test in my mind, which has been a bit up and down. It's got a 50% win and play strike rate since I started trying to improve my skill set, I suppose, on the daily front, looking at the stats since I started in November, early November. So something to work on, but I keep missing an absolute shed load of winners that the stats are firing out, and that's never good if you're trying to highlight as many of them as you can and get that profit total ticking over. Now, the only way, really, in my mind, to try and progress and improve your skill, if you have any interest in doing that, is to kind of look back and reflect on what you missed and why some horses won or performed better than I initially thought they would before the race. Clearly, there's many different ways to attack this great sport. That's why it's so good, and there are many different approaches you can take. But I thought, well, some of you may find this interesting or not, but it's like I said, for my own purposes as much as anything, I suppose, to get my head in the right space and the right place. Because in truth, the jump size have been a bit scratchy for a few weeks, which is part of the nature, especially the big race stuff. That's part of the nature of the beast and the competitive level of the races I play in. I will do a separate video, probably on Thursday, actually looking back at the Hennessy and the couple of races at the weekend. The horses I picked may still be running, and much to my great annoyance, as it always is, I was nowhere near any of the actual winners, which is actually more of a crime than picking horses nearer the back of the telly. But that's for later on. I'm going to start with San Pedro de Sinam, or however you want to pronounce his name, who won at Huntington for strategy S2A 16s, pummeled into around sixes. I think at around 9:30 or 10 a.m. when I kind of started to look, he was still a kind of decent 8-1 or 9-1. Now I spend, well, I was going to say our good friend Nick Mazur, top tipster, although he's in a bit of iffy form at the moment, but he was due a bad run, as he would admit, and that will soon disappear in no time. We kind of chat daily, and well, myself more than him are experts at analysing a race after it's happened. But we always chat and try and sound off ideas and talk about the different horses we put up. It's good fun, and the aim is really to try and improve ourselves, I suppose. And I clearly, on recent evidence, have a lot of improvement to do. There's always room for improvement. It's not from a bad base. But San Pedro, that's probably a long enough introduction. I've been talking already for 3 minutes. What am I going to say about this horse? Well, there's a few things I didn't think about enough in depth. Mainly, as Nick would tell me, I think I do at times have what I would call a first run of the season bias, whereby I will judge too harshly a horse's first run of the season, especially if they needed it, but more so on this occasion. And I think, in truth, I looked at this first run at Fontwell on the 18th of November. I kind of looked at the £10 claiming jockey and probably had a bias towards his inexperience. But in truth, he'd ridden a winner for the yard in early November. He'd ridden, that same horse he rode again okay at Wincanton. And again, all these kind of things you can build in the odds and work out if they're worth a go. I like being harsh on myself, probably overly harsh at times, but that is the only way to try and get better. So San Pedro, why could I have been close to him on the tipping front at morning prices at kind of 8 to 10 to 1? Well, we'd had a run, and there's a few things you can look at. You can go with the unexposed idea. So is the horse unexposed? is there a chance that there is more to come at some point? And is that day going to be today? The other flip side, of course, is looking at been there and done it horses, and horses you're expecting to return to a level of form they've shown before. They're already exposed, the handicap marks are dropping. They are then, of course, open to attack from anything which has an upwardly progressive profile. And of course, the aim is to assess that in any said race. Well, that's one option anyway. But San Pedro was unexposed. This win here is the win last time out. I should say I'm in Cougars Gold, which, as many of you know, is one of the main tools I use, and could clearly use better. But that run there was after 190 days off. Now I can see, clicking on this, he's a 5-year-old. He hasn't had many goes. He's already shown a certain level of ability. That can be more of a positive. It's not necessarily essential, but he had hacked up, hard held, in a Plumpton Class 3 novice chase. There may not have been much depth to it, although it did produce a subsequent winner in behind him. But at least it showed he knew how to put his head in front. He then kind of ran in some more heavy ground races. The wheels seemed to come off a bit. But then he returned to Fontwell. It could have been he was over-raced. He was only 5. He was entitled to strengthen up and grow. Of course, the yard may have been quiet. They may have been issues. As always, might be problems for certain bad runs. What I can see here looking at him now is that he returned in a decent Class 3. And actually, at the time, I didn't click on this in much depth, I don't think. But I was clearly too harsh to judge this particular run. If this page wants to load, I think I've got it somewhere already. Yes, here it is. So this is his return at Fontwell, where he's in 3rd. But look at the ratings. There's a 108 rated horse. He's split. Well, he thumped the Chris Gordon horse. I haven't looked at him. He might have needed the run also, but he was rated 120. He came within 7 lengths of Johnny Farrelly's 133 rated Anonu and the 130 rated winner Lisp. So even if he was 100% fit, he wasn't entitled to run any better than he actually did. And in that context, that was quite a decent run, given he was only 7 lengths behind a 133 rated horse. So that was the first error there, and that's always something to try and improve on. Actually look at the quality and the ability of the horses that are surrounding what on the face of it might seem a poor performance. But when you look at that and go, well, he was 9-1, he may have needed the run. It was over 18 furlongs, it was Class 3, and he's surrounded by horses rated a hell of a lot higher. And he comes to today, he'll be fitter, even if he was fairly straight for that race. He's got a run under his belt, so he'll be fitter. His marker's dropped £2. He's now got the £10 claimer for a claimer who's ridden a winner recently. So he's actually £12 lower than that original run there. He drops in class back into a Class 4. Says every ability, well, clearly he's facing lesser rivals. There's no 120, 130 horses in this race. And he's stepping up in trip. Now, the thing that you then have to do, of course, is work out whether or not that's going to suit, but it's doing something different. You could judge that he was running as if he was, that run might suggest the step up in trip may have been useful. You can look at breeding, of course, and you can see there related to kind of, well, at least 1 2.5 mile horse. So that's him, really. There are plenty of reasons there to think that he may improve for that, and then you're building all of those unknowns, because this is an unexposed horse who has shown some ability. You're building all those unknowns into the price, and on reflection, of course, with hindsight eyes, which is always easier after the race, but maybe 8 or 9-1 was better there. So I need to take better account of putting that, well, especially seasonal reappearances, but especially and also for horses dropping in class, putting that performance 2 runs ago in context. Especially for horses dropping in class. Gary Moore was starting to go a bit better, if memory serves me right. Before this win here, he had, so that win there, oh yeah, he'd had one at Leicester, you know, he'd had and one there at Newbury. So he had the odd horse running well and placing, and they were starting to hit a bit of form. And then you could make a judgment of the opposition. Midnight Glory's a 6-year-old. This was his or her 12th hurdle run, so a bit more exposed. Reason to think, you know, he wasn't doing anything different either. So reason to think she may improve for that. or not, so you could take on. This horse was stepping up in trip, which is an unknown, of course. Same class, also unexposed, but you can build up a picture of why you think a horse might not perform to get a level of ability, or kind of a level of competitiveness in your head for that race. Exeter here, this one was returning to kind of softer ground, which may have been a question for the Vales, and stepping up in distance, which she hadn't proven herself in. Yeah, I was going to say she or he, so on and so forth. So yeah, there's reasons there. San Pedro de Sanam, certainly at the price is why I should have had and looked at him with slightly different eyes. It's no surprise in handicap hurdles when an unexposed lightly raced one comes to take a victory. So there's some lessons there. What have I ticked around to 10 minutes already? Hopefully you found that of some interest. I wanted this to be shorter, but we'll keep it under 20. So that's him. What am I going to flick on to now? There's another one I was going to flick onto. Oh yeah. So if I'm on today, I want to take a quick look at Cougars Gold, who I completely ignored. 7-2, 10-3 turned out to be a decent price on reflection. Probably so. Let's just have a look. Peter Burns was starting to go a bit better. There was an issue about yard form and were they kind of in any form. I was a bit too quick to judge Cougars Gold. Again, unexposed, hadn't had many runs. There's promise of more to come. And if I look back through his form here, he'd won a Class 5 handicap hurdle at Cartmel last year. He's then been chasing, and actually I was probably too harsh to judge some of his chasing efforts. Well, 2 of them were in heavy, which I'm not 100% sure he wanted. Then he went back into a Class 4 handicap hurdle, where he didn't run too badly. And then he ran it over extended trips, so 24 furlongs at Sutherland soft, where arguably he ran like a non-stayer. Then he went to 26 furlongs after a break at Chepstow, closed 5 out, driven 3 out, soon beaten. Again, he may have needed it, and he could have been outstayed. Then he went to Fontwell, where he stepped where he stepped forward on that performance in a Class 5. And importantly, like, they clearly were riding him to try and get the trip here, so holding up a horse. So it's no surprise they dropped back in trip. They might try and be a bit more aggressive with them and run and race them a bit more prominent. So he was third, 3 out and 2 out, and I should have gone back and watched that race really, and I might have been inspired a bit further. But he was doing something different here, so he returns to slightly better ground. Well, soft, maybe not Foss-Lass soft, but importantly, dropping in trip, 3rd run of the season. He's going to be fit now, and the cheek piece is returned. I didn't note that either, so clearly I need to be putting more time in, I think, because I argue in my own head I'm making elementary mistakes. And you cannot cut corners in horse racing if you're attacking races cold or even with any way in. Otherwise, you look a right mug at times, as has been the case on a few occasions recently. So yeah, he was dropping in trip, coming here fit. His runs, he was getting better. That last run at Foss-Lass was decent. He was unexposed, and there was still more to come. And on ratings and what they'd done in their racing career to date, he was the best in the race. I'm quickly going to go over to horse race base. Another set of tools I use. You'll know that I use the horse race base ratings. He was 2nd in here. Now, if I just go to this little ratings test here, these are the horse race base standard total ratings, which is this one down the side here, which you can order in any way you please. This is those in the history, well, the last 750 races actually in handicap chases, standard handicap chases. But the top 3 in those ratings in handicap chases win 53% of all races. Clearly, some of these are going to be with kind of 5, 6, 7 runners, etc., or 4 runners. But you can see the stats there. Top 3 win 53% of all handicap chases in the horse race base total ratings. The top 5 win 77%. Of all handicap chases, and those kind of stats I suppose I need to hammer into my head, because however Chris at Horse Race Base compiles these ratings, he uses various different things, looking at the horse, etc. They clearly do work, especially in handicaps and especially in handicap chases. And actually 63% of all races on Horse Race Base are won, by horses in the top 4 of Horse Race Base ratings. So I should have, because I did know that in the back of my head, I should have put a bit more focus on that, really. Given that rating set and some of the gap back to the rest and everything that I've just discussed about the horse, unexposed, more to come, running into fitness, dropping in trip rate, run well up to kind of 21 furlongs. Sean Byrne back on board. It's likely he's going to be prominent. He rarely has a handicap chaser in a bad position. Running 18 days later, he's fit, he's well. And then I'm not going to do this, but again, if you're 100% not 100% convinced that a horse, especially one that's in a 10 to 3 kind of 9 to 2 range, which I suppose I'm looking at for the stats test, you can convince yourself about the horse, but then you can convince yourself by looking through every other runner. We've got an 11-year-old here who hadn't really shown much, and taking on 11-year-olds unless they're called, well, taking on veterans unless they're called Harry the Viking, isn't necessarily a bad idea, and he arguably wasn't in great form, but you could have looked in a bit more depth. Hurricane Rita had quite a lot of questions, thumped on quite a lot of runs recently, had a few new questions, especially over fences. Global Domination was 10. Yes, he was dropping in class, but arguably he was short enough, and he clearly didn't have the upside potential of Cougars Gold, even though he's lightly raced, but he's a 10-year-old. Johnny Farrelly's horse was returning to fences after an absolute age. There's jumping questions, all sorts there. Jagopolis, an 11-year-old, and then some of these just hadn't really shown much at all on recent runs. Wishing a Well, not much there, been thumped plenty in the market. Clearly, massive prices give you a guide. The Midnight Owl pulled up before November when fitness wasn't necessarily a question and hadn't got within 13 lengths of anything on recent starts. So actually you could make a case by process of elimination, and that turned out to be, given Cougars Gold hacked up by about 8 lengths or whatever it was, turned out to be, in hindsight, a great bet. But everything I've just discussed there, I need to get in this thick skull before the bloody race, and to put some of these up along with the Gary Moore winner at Huntington, and put some of them up before the race in the test, and then we will start to see that profit pile grow in the way it should, because the stats are finding enough winners. That is the point. And your host here sat in this chair isn't doing a good enough job of finding enough of them, which is clearly evidence, and I need to up my game. So that's those two. I'm ticking around to 17 minutes. I'm going to wrap this up at 20, but hopefully you found some of those things there interesting. I'm going to focus now on a horse which it wasn't on any of the stats, but one that Nick and I had a chat about after the race. Whenever there's a winner, especially a handicap hurdle that's arguably unexposed and it was a big price, we always look back and think, could we have found it? And I think Nick himself thinks he could possibly have found this, especially last night. This morning it was 20 to 1. Mazalto, or however we want to say that, for Pat Phelan. With the excellent Gigi's Gold, I can see this sea of green under the trainer indicators are kind of luring me in. I can see that he's in form, which is of some interest. But I just want to open up this horse. Again, let's look at the hurdle runs. Only 7. This was her first win. So actually, this was only her second handicap hurdle run today. That win there is the one today. Now, could we have predicted this win? Yes, we could have. Now, my daily focus at the moment is trying to improve my stats and focus on my own stats content. I suppose this particular bit is for any of you who might want to improve your own betting, or maybe think about horse racing in a way you haven't done before. That's, of course, if I say anything in a moment that's enlightening as I tick round to 19 minutes. Right, what could we have known about this horse? Firstly, that run was the first run after 260 days off, sent off at 33 to 1. Will Kennedy on board. Phelan's actual record from memory with horses returning after a break, which I knew this in my own head, isn't that great. Let's just assume she needed it. Let's assume, I'm checking it's a she. Yeah, it's a she. Let's assume she needed it. It was, I actually watched it back after the race. It was interesting. She got outpaced a bit. It was on good to soft. Will Kennedy didn't give her a hard time at all, ran okay at places and then kind of plodded on, but let's assume she needed it. Could we have predicted her running like a horse, hacking up by 15 lengths that had 15, 20 pounds in hand? Well, firstly, the horse was rated in the low 70s on the flat. That should have given us some guide. Now, it's a rough kind of equation, but they do say you can add, well, depending on if you look at time form ratings or racing post ratings, you can add 20 to 40 pounds on top of a flat mark as a rough guide. So even, well, £20 clearly puts her on the mark she is now. But if you start to go 30 to £40, it's not impossible that she was going to win like a horse with £10 or more in hand, or run like that at some point in a handicap hurdle. We had to predict whether that was going to be today. Now I didn't look at this horse in much depth, though I did tip in the race. So clearly, and I do look at them all, and clearly there's a few things I overlooked. What I should have done. Now, if we go to hurdles, is there any hope of why she might run quite well one day in a handicap, in a weak handicap, class 5 handicap hurdle? Let's look at this Ascot run. He ran her in a class 4 maiden hurdle. I'm not going to click through every horse here, but again, this goes back to that starting point about Roman de Sanam, the Huntington winner for Gary Moore. Now, the King horse came into this rated 1-2-2. You've got 1-2-3, 1-2-7. The Skelton horse that finished behind her this day is rated £20 or more, £25 inferior to the mark she came into the race today. Sent off 66 to 1. No, actually, I've watched that race back as well. She was keen. She pulled. She was actually kind of there or thereabouts. So they turned for home out to 2 out. Was an okay fifth approaching the last and kind of plodded on. But she ran as well as could be expected, really, when you're running up against horses in the low 120s there. And of course, the aim probably was to get a handicap mark. So that was some interest. And she was, as Nick reminded me after this, the distance they're beating isn't so important. It is about the context of the horses that are around them and the ability of the horses around them. And she was surrounded by horses who are much, much superior in ability and quality. And arguably, that was her best run on hurdles before this. And it was in soft, which could be noted given she ran in soft for the first time since today at Fontwell. So yeah, her jumping started to get improved. She was a bit iffy, and she then didn't show much in Novice Hurdles after that. The ground and the track may have been excuses at Kempton, etc. But you can start to get to picture a case together there with the flat mark, that run at Ascot, the fact she probably needed it last time out, and then the trainer form in terms of his horses going well, and him probably being in the best form I can ever remember Pat Phelan being in. And with that knowledge, yes, there are a lot of questions. Yes, there's things she has to go and improve. There's a few things you have to overlook, but she was 20 to 1, I suppose, which is the main point. Now, could I have got to a place close to that if I wasn't fixated on working out whether I could have tipped Blue April? Well, to my credit at least, so kind of as a score out of 10, maybe a 3, I was quite happy to take on the top 2 in the market, so that judgment was fine. We had Dan Gunner, Fergal O'Brien, who was 0 from 10 0 places. I mean, on what basis you would back that at kind of 3 to 1 or so, as he was in his morning price, I'm not 100% sure. That run last time, apparently, where if I went to watch it back, was interesting. They did speak to the jockey, and all of that got, I got a lot of press actually, I think, about whether the jockey didn't ride the horse to the best of its ability. Now, you can look at that and think, oh, he's going to win next time. Or if you're connections and you've just been warned and your jockey's been warned and called into the stewards to explain a ride, you don't necessarily want to hack up with that horse on its next start. Do you? I don't know. I'm thinking about out loud there, but that's a different way to look at these things, I suppose. And I was happy to take on Sky for the Stars, because I did think he might get outpaced. Yes, he might have needed the run also in November when he finished ahead of Mazalto, but he's a 16 furlong chaser, and that doesn't exactly mean you in the mud, and that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a 16 furlong handicap hurdler. He has been outpriced at times and plugged on, so I was happy to take him on at his price. Blue April ran well. She came second, or he came second. But he did bump into one with the load in hand. So there's different things you can look at there. I've focused on a few things there. All of those winners, those 3 I've mentioned there, were unexposed. There was promise of more to come one day. They all had slightly different profiles. One, there was a class drop, distance moves, jockey changes, building on a run from last time out, first run of the season, etc. And of course, pinning and giving some context to some of their runs and the horses that surrounded them, especially that Moore horse and this one in front of us here, surrounded by horses much higher level. It wasn't impossible to think this horse one day might hack up. Now, the challenge for us all and the challenge for me is to land on the Gary Moore winners, to land on Cougars Gold, and to land on a few more of the stats winners, which there's winners galore in the test zone, in section 1, etc. Outside of the 4 kind of advised strategies, there's winners galore there. And that's a positive. The content is finding winners, but I need to start practicing what I preach in terms of using the information as starting points. Hopefully some of you are doing a better job at that than me, but I'm ever the perfectionist, and what drives me every day is trying to solve the puzzle and trying to make sure I can win long term. It's all in my head. The knowledge is there. I think about the racing, certainly post-race, in the right way. It's fair to say at the moment, everything I've discussed in this video and a lot more besides, I am not piecing together very well before the race. So I need to tinker with some things mentally there, I think. And maybe it's a case of giving myself more time. But hopefully, as I tick around to 25 minutes, you may have found that interesting. And there's some things you can take away and apply to your own betting and your own racing. So with that, I will say thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Yeah, I hope that was useful to a point. It's a kind of therapy for me, I suppose. And do shout at me in the future if you think I've missed something, or question different horses, or try yourself using all those things I've just discussed and whatever approach you take to horse racing and analysis at the moment to attack some of the stats content in the blog, and feel free to discuss horses in the comments or whatever. But for now, yes, I will shut up and leave you be. So this is Josh saying, yeah, until the next time, bye for now.